Welcome to the second week of Advent. It is Wednesday, December the 11th, 2024. This is the Manna at the Tap podcast provided by Tapestry Ministries. In it, we actively seek the spiritual nourishment our souls crave. Together, we explore one of the daily lectionary readings designed to be the manna which nourishes our spiritual growth and provides the sustenance our souls need. I'm Gloria, a fellow traveler on this spiritual journey, and together we share insights and interpretations from these readings which enrich our spiritual lives. Luke chapter 7 opens with a centurion leader who, after hearing about Jesus, requested healing for his servant. Jesus healed the servant without seeing him. Then we have the miraculous story of a widow from the town of Nain whose only son had died. Seeing the widow, Jesus had compassion on her and raised her son from the dead. The lectionary reading for today continues with Luke chapter 7, verses 18 to 30. John the Baptist's disciples visited him in prison and told him what was happening with Jesus. He then sent two of them to ask Jesus if he was the one to come or were they to wait for another. When the Gospel of Luke opened, we have the story of baby John, who, while still in his mother's womb, became excited when Mary and his mother sang a song celebrating his upcoming birth and the upcoming birth of Jesus. As an adult, John was in the wilderness and he was the voice that called the people to repent because the Messiah had come. His message was stern, warning the people of God's impending judgment. And he was the one who baptized Jesus in the Jordan River. And now John is in prison for publicly speaking the truth about what King Herod was doing wrong. He's alone, perplexed, and wondering if Jesus is the Messiah, the one who was to come. But he reminded himself that when the Messiah came, he would release the captives and the oppressed would go free. And this is according to Luke chapter 4, verse 18. But there he was, imprisoned. There was no judgment against Herod or the oppressive Romans who controlled the people. Now, I believe that Jesus knew John was in prison, but Jesus seemed to have kept his distance from him. And he will respond to John's question by telling John's disciples to report back to him what they had seen and heard. The blind received their sight, the lame walked, the deaf heard, the dead was raised, and the poor were told the good news. John's disciples left to return to him, but we do not know how he responded to what they told him. After they left, though, Jesus turned John's question on its head and asked the crowd, "Who was John to you? And what did you go out to the wilderness to see?" Jesus called John more than an ordinary prophet, and there would be no one like him. The closing verses of our lectionary text, verses 29 to 30, gives us some insight into John's ministry before his imprisonment. Many people including the tax collectors who heard his message, acknowledged God's way of living right. John baptized them, but the Pharisees, the experts in the law, rejected the plan of God for themselves. That might leave us wondering why John had a question for Jesus. And this might be an answer. John was in prison, isolated, and without a community around him. His message to the people had been about the side of God's judgment. But when Jesus came, he proclaimed the other side of God, the side of God's love. Jesus reached out to the blind, the lame, the deaf, and the lepers. And these are the people who had no one to defend them. Remember the widow at the beginning of Luke chapter 7? She was all alone with no one to support her now that she had no longer a husband or a son, and Jesus had compassion for her. The message sent back to John focuses on Jesus' miraculous actions. And this is the message of the gospel. The gospel is seen and heard. And we must not limit God to our narrow ways about how God should work in the world, because this can often lead us to be disappointed with God, with others, and with ourselves.